Welcome. This is the Post-Secondary Transition Podcast, where we have conversations around the ins and outs and everything in between of the transition process for families of students with disabilities. I'm one of the hosts. My name is Patrick Cadigan, and I am a public school transition coordinator. As always, I have a co-host, and who would that be?
I am Meghan Smallwood, and I am also a public school transition coordinator.
We are actually back. I feel
Holy
like,
moly.
I feel like our schedules have now caught up, and we had an opportunity to talk, and we can throw out hey, this is what we're going to talk about, and this is what we're
I
going to
know.
do. So that's a good thing. So one topic that comes up all the time is eligibility for DDA services. Now, for the uninitiated, DDA, or the Developmental Disabilities Administration, it is the agency that provides funding and services to individuals with disabilities.
And I think it's something that when you start that contact with them, it can be very confusing because, as a state agency may do, they send out the same generic letter to every person who has applied, and you get a lot of information that may not pertain to you. And it may be hard to interpret what the letter is telling you. And we'll go into a little detail about that. But as we always reiterated, it's good to use your resources. If you have a transition specialist at your school, reach out to them and show them the letter. I appreciate when families will send me a picture so I can say, okay, this is what it means, or don't worry about this. So we just want to go through what everything means so you have a better idea when you do get that correspondence from them.
We're going to presuppose a few instances, but we did want to kind of lay it out. All right, so now this is again for families who have applied for services through DDA. We encourage them to do so prior to 18. In fact, as transition coordinators, it's like, boom, you hit 14, it's a good idea to do this. Completing that application will then add your child to the list. And the reason that we're going to talk about this is that, again, we want to go back and remind everyone that DDA, or DD services in general, because of course DDA is specific to where we are, at least the name is, but DD services, they're based on eligibility. It is not an entitlement. And so there is a limited funding assignment. So you have applied, and then you will receive a letter. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So ultimately, the eligibility level that you want to receive to get that full funding after 21 is for your individual to be determined as developmentally disabled, DD eligible. So that means that they understand that the disability was manifested before age 22 and that your young adult will be unable to live independently without some support or regular assistance moving forward. So that is what you wanna see on the letter, and it's like one sentence, like I said, in a whole document of other things that they send along, but you wanna look for that DD eligibility, and then there's different levels of that. So if you apply prior to 18, which we advise just to make sure that DDA knows your young adult exists and puts them on the database, you may get a future needs level. And what's confusing when you get that letter is it'll say, "We recognize the level of need. However, there's no funding available." That just means it's because of the age. They're too young right now since it's transitioning youth at 21, but they put your young adult on the registry and they're just not going to get any direct services like with a coordinator yet. Okay, but future needs is fine. Once your young adult reaches 18, that's usually when it'll switch over to something called current request. And that's recognizing that the services will be needed within that 3-year window when they exit the school system.
So you are seeing, if you see future need, that indicates that you have been found DD eligible. However, you just won't need services yet. I'm actually going through this with one of my students right now, that the coordinator who I was emailing back and forth, they threw out, just like Megan had said, that when said student turns 18, make sure to respond back so that we can
Change them from future needs to current
sorry.
request.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, and that usually requires contact made from your end, or if you have a transition specialist at school, their end with DDA, because, DDA has a list of thousands of people. So we want to make sure that your name is pulled up and that they recognize that they're turning 18, and then they will send you something called a choice letter in which you would select a provider agency for a coordinator.
So we've gone through this process now. The family, they received their DD eligible letter and it was categorized as future needs. Eventually, what will happen is that once the student hits around the age of 18, they'll change it over to current request. But they will receive that choice letter to choose a coordinator of community service, right?
Right.
If the family doesn't choose one themselves, what happens there? Like if they simply don't respond?
It used to be that they automatically were randomly assigned to, an agency, but lately, and I don't know if it's just that the agency's been overwhelmed with cases, I've seen where it just kinda sits and nothing's really happening, which makes me nervous because then, you get to the point where you're closer to 21 and there's nobody on top of it for them. So, I highly recommend if you know your individual's turning 18 to just stay on top of it. If you haven't heard from a coordinator, then, reach out again to your transition specialist or the eligibility specialist at DDA to find out who your connection should be. Also, I think it is a good opportunity for you to select that agency rather than be randomly assigned. So you have some input, talking to other families to hear who they've worked with or what their experience has been can help, but also remember that it really comes down to the coordinator more so than the actual agency.
Megan, let's say that a family has chosen an agency. However, they are unhappy. Are they stuck with that agency forever?
Absolutely not. You're not even stuck with that coordinator forever. If you really are not, feeling that connection, or if you're not getting the communication you like, you can always ask the supervisor to switch to a new coordinator. That doesn't work, you can always reach out to the eligibility specialist, the DDA, to switch agencies. It is not a long process. Like I've seen, a week or two turnaround for families, and then you can just move forward from there. But I did wanna jump over because you mentioned between future needs and current requests. That is being recognized as full support. That is DD eligible. Now, I've seen families get a letter back that says supports only. And the wording is a little confusing because it says it recognizes that there's a level of need, but it's at supports only, so it's not that great of a need. And it can be a little misleading because there is no funding for supports only. DDA is limited because of what it has, and it's only going to provide funding for those who have full funding given to them. So if you do see supports only, that means what I tell families is that more documentation is really needed to show that level of need, that long term level of need for your young adult as they get past 21. I've had families who we know that the young adult will need that, but the documentation that was sent might have been too old. So when I say documentation, I mean like a psych assessment or an educational assessment. It might have been 6 years old. Well, DDA wants to know that that's still the case now, here and now. And a lot of times, if you get a supports only decision, or if you get it said that says, we have determined the individual ineligible, there's usually a box underneath that will tell you their reason behind it. And it'll reference this psychological assessment by so and so is from 2010. Please send further documentation. Or what I've seen lately is the disability code. If they have a disability code that is not a cognitive disability, DDA is kind of drawing that as a red flag to understand why there's more support needed. So it can be worked through. You just have to know and talk to people who understand what it means to help you get through it all. The other thing is when you do get a supports only or an eligible decision, in that packet of papers that you get from DDA with that, one important sentence, they will also send information about an appeal. So if you feel like the decision that was made is not accurate and you want to appeal it, there's paperwork that they send, and that can simply be filled out and sent with the additional documentation that they need or further explanation about it. So that is included in the packet.
And one other thing worth mentioning is that, again, different families experience different challenges and they have different circumstances. So, in some cases, there is a different priority level that are referred to as both crisis prevention and then crisis resolution. Megan, did you want to talk about each one?
Yeah, so I've had families who have asked, well, is it possible to get any support before 21? We're having a very tough time. And again, like Patrick said, it's individualized. If you, just feel like you need more help or it's just hard, like they're going to be very particular. They have criteria and you will have to plead your case. But for crisis prevention, they recognize that there's an urgent need. So that could be that the caretaker is too old or has health issues and is unable to care for them. This could be that within the next year, like they know something bigger is going to happen and they need to be alert to it. So it's just pleading the case that we're going to need some funding sooner than later. Crisis prevention's kind of putting you on like status, like, okay, there might be something coming up, but let's see if other supports, because that's the other thing too. DDA is going to look to see what else you're accessing in the community to help you with your need before they venture up to DDA funding. So, coordinator may recommend that you look at the local health services office, or have you accessed other waivers that are available? So, they might put you in touch with other resources before they bump you up to a status where, okay, you have, it's still not helping. Now we need to look at it together. With crisis resolution, that's a little more severe, and it's saying, "We need the help right here, right now." And I've seen cases where it's because the family lost their home and they have nowhere to go, and so they need support. A lot of times it can be the level of physical aggression towards themselves or others has significantly increased, and it's dangerous. And again, it could be the caretaker not able to manage them. It I've had coordinators, typically the coordinator will have to come out, meet with the family, they gather additional documentation, and then they submit the information to DDA to determine whether the individual would fit this priority category. And I've had families who have, like, really worked with the coordinator to explain to them and gather things like hospital records, doctor's notes, things like that to show it. But it just keep in mind, it's not given lightly. And we know that there's families out there who really do need that support. So if you really feel like it's your situation, make sure you're talking to someone to see how to get about doing that.
All right. Well, fantastic. Well, I think that that was a really good conversation to have. This is something that has come up. Now, I'm a fairly new transition coordinator, which is to say, new to the process itself. And to be perfectly frank, and I tell my families this all the time, in some cases, I am learning with them and we are going through the experience together. And I'm like, hey, this is, I don't know, let's go find out.
Yeah, and I can tell you, even being in charge of the whole transition team for the county, I still have cases that make me scratch my head, and I'm like, huh, I'm going to contact my people and find out because it's so individualized, but that's what I love, like when you learn different cases and then you can refer back to them like, oh, I remember in this situation. So we're always building and we're always learning.
Just a reminder, we have had a conversation around DD agencies in the past. There will be a link in the show notes to that. There will also be a link in the show notes to some additional resources that we feel like can help families out. But yeah, this was a conversation that we wanted to have. And I'm glad that we finally are back on a calendar track and could do it.
Me too. It's been quite the busy year, but all good things.
All right. And we still have more to come, but we thank you guys for joining us and we will talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
You'll find all the links to the information from our conversations in our show notes. We would love for the information from this and all our other discussions to reach as many families as possible, and we need your help to do that. You can find our conversations at www.p2transition.com. Like, follow, and share out the podcast. Our conversations are posted to all the major platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and that's just naming a few. So please share and share often.
Please also check out our YouTube channel. Now that we've done some of the legwork for you by curating videos of topics that revolve around transition, we have playlists for guardianship, alternatives to guardianship, ABLE accounts, and there's more to come. So please be sure to subscribe there as well. And then finally, check out our website, which is full of information and links to resources around the transition process. So open your web browser of choice and surf to www.postsecondary.transition.com. And we thank you so much for the time you spent with us and look forward to talking again soon.